we can probably go ahead and get started. There will probably be a few other people joining, but I'll go ahead and introduce you briefly. So we're really excited to welcome and have Dr. John Finoff join us. He's currently serving as the Chief Medical Officer for the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And he's going to be talking to us about how to become an Olympic or Paralympic team physician. So go ahead and take it away. And if you want to go ahead and share and then put the slides in full screen.
Absolutely.
John, that was a nice humble brag with the standing desk. We're all very
stiff arming everybody until.
Let's see. Can you guys see this okay? Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen. Yep.
All right. All right, there. Is it full screen for you?
We can still see presenter mode, so it probably looks just like it looks for you with the smaller screen and any notes you have.
All right. All right, well, we'll do it in presenter mode then. Unless I can figure out how to do that otherwise. So I'm going to talk to you guys about how to become an Olympic or Paralympic team physician. I'm really excited to be here. I'm originally from Boulder, Colorado, so I'm a native Coloradan. I would have been fourth generation, actually. My whole family still lives here on both my mom's and dad's side. I have a 99-year-old grandmother that Scott has seen not too long ago and taken care of. She's great. So it was really fun to be back here and CU was CU is my alma mater from undergraduate, and so obviously I have a lot of fond memories there, and I'm close with both Vinu and Scott. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and chat with you guys about how to become a team physician for the Olympics and Paralympics. So I do receive royalties from both Up to Date and from Demos Publishing for chapters and books that I've written. And I'm going to talk to you about a couple of different pathways that you can take in order to actually go to the Olympics or Paralympics. And then I'll talk to you about my story so you can just kind of see, you know, how one person did it. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have related to this, and then also for my role if you're interested in hearing about that. So, you know, if you're working with one of our ski teams, this is something you have to be prepared to take care of. You have your number one athlete. It's a month before the Olympics. They're at a World Cup event, and this is just a trial run. And they land, and you can see his left arm is outstretched and in an abducted and externally rotated position. And so he had a fracture dislocation of that shoulder, as well as a concussion at the time. Despite that, he was able to, he was still kept on the Olympic team, went to the Olympics, and 6 weeks after this injury, and on the last week of the Olympics, because the Olympics are a 3-week event, he competed. He also was a flag bearer in the opening ceremonies, which is a really privileged position that the athletes vote for who they want to bear their flag. He was a 5-time Olympian. He's a Coloradan. So, I mean, he's a super guy, but big things happen when you're taking care of these athletes, and you have to make a lot of decisions about return to play and when they're safe to be able to compete. So as far as the different pathways, obviously the first thing you have to do is go to medical school, and all of you have done that. Then you have to do your residency, and there are different choices in residency. You can go through orthopedic surgery, or you can do one of the 5 primary care specialties that would enable you to go into a sports medicine fellowship, surgical for orthopedics and primary care sports for the pediatrics, internal medicine, PM&R, emergency medicine, family medicine pathway. And then you can get board certified. And I think that if your goal is to work at the highest level of athletics, whether it's at the Olympic or Paralympic Games, or be the head team physician for a professional team, or work with a Division I college, you really do have to have that sports medicine board certification in order to work at that level. So it doesn't mean that you can't do sports medicine, but if you want to be at that level, almost always it's written into the job requirements. So after you finish your fellowship, you really need to gain a lot of sports medicine experience and make sure that you are an expert in the area. So you should volunteer to do pre-participation physical examinations, work with your local high school, and if you have the opportunity, work with a local college. And as you're working up through the ranks, you might get to a higher level college or potentially to a professional team. It's also really important to work at mass participation events because obviously the Olympic and Paralympic Games are mass participation events. And so working at marathons and triathlons and various tournaments really gives you a lot of experience because it's totally different than a Friday night football game. And then after you've kind of gotten a really nice broad range of experience, you've worked with a lot of different athletes, then you want to start thinking about what is my target sport? Who do I want to work with? And, you know, and again, at what level? And you want to start focusing in on that sport so that you gain some sport specific experience. In addition, you really need to have administrative experience. So much of sports medicine involves planning. And so whether that's coordinating pre-participation physicals or being the medical director for a large event, I mean, that takes a totally different skill set than just doing the pre-participation physical or being a physician at a mass participation event. You have to know how to come up with your all of the medical supply lists. You need to be able to recruit all of the different medical personnel who are going to be working at the event. You need to figure out where you're going to station them along an event. You know, what types of practitioners. If it's a high acuity event, then you're going to want to have a lot of people with emergency medical training and so on. And then the other thing when you're looking at high level athletics is you really do want to develop a national reputation. And so it's really important to educate people. So do presentations at regional and national and international conferences. Make sure that you're doing research, you're publishing your research, and you're presenting that research. Volunteer to be on committees. There's a lot of different committees that are very specific to sports medicine. Some of them are in sports medicine societies like ACSM or AMSSM, but there's also things like an international federation of marathon directors where you can work with other marathon directors from around the world on developing protocols for hyponatremia and other things like that. And of course, volunteering at national organizations. And then after you've done all of that, you know, you've essentially established your reputation, you've got your experience, you've got both administrative and clinical skills, then you have to choose the pathway that you want to go to the Olympics or Paralympics. One way of doing it is through a national governing body, and you can think of the national governing bodies as the small business for sport. So examples are the United States Ski and Snowboard Association, the USSA, United States of America Track and Field, USA Gymnastics, and so on. So there's about 54 national governing bodies. In each of them, they govern the whole structure of that sport in the United States. And you can work at local, regional, or national level with the national governing body. Another option is to work with an international federation. So all the different countries have their national governing bodies, but the national governing bodies report up to the international federation who establishes all of the international rules for that sport. So for skiing, it's the International Ski Federation, or FIS. You can work directly for a National Olympic Committee. So in the United States, that's the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And we're one of the few countries in the world that actually has combined the Olympic and Paralympic Committee into one organization. Most, they're two separate things. Or you can work with an Olympic organizing committee, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that, but an example would have been the Salt Lake Organizing Committee, or, you know, and hopefully they're going to actually get a bid again in potentially like 2030 would be a time frame that they'd be looking at having a Winter Olympics here in the United States again. Or you can work with the International Olympic Committee or International Paralympic Committee. Those are two separate organizations. But each of those have representatives that go to the Olympic Games. So if you want to look at the NGB pathway, one of the first things to do is to contact the medical director for that NGB. So my primary experience and how I ended up in my current role was working with the United States Ski and Snowboard Association. So the medical director, while I was working with them, they actually had 3 different ones, but the most recent one was a guy named Kyle Wilkins, and he was let go as part of the whole COVID restructuring that most NGBs went through. I mean, this was just a huge financial crisis for sport in the United States. And Jillian Bauer is now in that role, and she's fantastic. She's a physical therapist, athletic trainer, dual trained. You contact that person and you say, hey, this is my experience, this is my training, you know, I'm willing to volunteer in any role that you would want me to do. And they'll usually start having you cover specific events. Most of the time, if your NGB is not small, then they have a very sophisticated system set up for their pool. So with the USSA, they have about 250 physicians in their physician pool. And in order to qualify, you have to have been in practice for 3 years, unless you did a fellowship that is affiliated with the USSA, like at Steadman Hawkins with their surgical sports medicine fellowship. You have to have sports board certification, you have to have specific event coverage experience, and you have to have a certain amount of malpractice. And that is an interesting thing that you guys have to think about. I don't know what CU's policy is, but if you're in private practice or you're in some settings where you're an employed physician, whether it's academic or otherwise, a lot of times your policy will not cover you going and working to cover sports events, and specifically high-level sports events like the Olympics or Paralympics. Because if something goes wrong, and if you do get sued and you have to cover future earnings of somebody who's making, you know, $10 million a year, that's a huge deal. It's a lot of liability. And so you have to make sure that your insurance is willing to cover that. A lot of large academic institutions are self-insured. And if your specialty is in sports medicine, they recognize that that's part of your specialty. And if your institution has a contract with that specific team, then they'll typically cover you. And then you apply for the position. A lot of the different NGBs are not very sophisticated, but some are, and the USSA has an awesome conference that you can go to every year. Most NGBs do not, but the one for the USSA is called the Medical Emergencies for Skiers and Snowboarders Conference. It's held annually up at Beaver Creek. It's right after the Birds of Prey downhill World Cup that's there. And they essentially go over, you do an ATLS course, essentially. I mean, you practice doing trachs and chest tubes and taking care of femur fractures and pelvic fractures and stuff. And you do it all in a conference room initially in small groups with ski patrol and trauma surgeons and stuff. And then you go up on the slopes and they set up trauma stations where they have different simulations, and you have to put on tourniquets and do everything in the cold and put people into the sleds and pack them in there while you're doing chest compressions and stuff. And it's cold and nothing ever works right. And it's a great way of training. That is exactly where you want to make all your mistakes, is on the mannequin during that course, as opposed to when you're actually taking care of somebody. It was a really good course though. And then usually you'll start at smaller events. So it might be like the Junior National Championships, might be the Midwest Divisional Championships. And then they start moving you up where you do second tier international events like the Junior World Championships, Europa Cups or Continental Cups. And then you start getting into higher tier events. So World Cups, World Championships, and eventually Olympic and Paralympic competitions. For the international federations, most of the time they're selecting their physicians from people who have worked their way up through a national governing body. So for instance, while I was with the USSA, I had moved up into a specific position there that I'll talk to you guys about in a little bit, but they had a rep that worked with the International Ski Federation. And so before my current position opened up, that was my goal, is to move from the USSA up to the International Ski Federation. Now, when you go to events though, if you're working for the International Federation, you're usually there as an advisor or somebody who reviews emergency action plans. You have more of an administrative role. You're not delivering healthcare. So it is a little bit different than working at the NGB level and actually delivering care when somebody has an injury. So the USOPC pathway to go to the Olympics or Paralympics, first thing to do is you have to meet the criteria, and their criteria are minimum of 3 years of experience. They prefer if you have a sports medicine fellowship, but recognize that there are physicians with great skill sets that haven't had a fellowship, so they do make exceptions to that. And then you have to have, malpractice insurance and no claims against you, and so on and so forth. But then you apply, and if you get accepted, you do a volunteer rotation at one of the Olympic and Paralympic training centers. And there are 3 training centers in the United States. One is here in Colorado Springs, one is in Chula Vista, which is essentially San Diego, and one is in Lake Placid. Now, a lot of different athletes are at all of these sites. Some live off-site and just access the venues during the day. Some live on site, so there are dorms and a cafeteria and things so people can just live there. But there are specific home bases for different teams. So for instance, in Colorado Springs, they have cycling and triathlon and shooting. Chula Vista has track and field, rugby. Lake Placid has bobsled, a bunch of the different sliding sports. So after you do your 2-week rotation, you'll get reviewed. And if you did really well and they liked you and you learned a lot while you were there and they thought your skill set was excellent, then they'll select you to go and help with a second tier event. So like the Youth Pan Am Games or Para-Pan Games, the Youth Olympic or Paralympic Games. And then if those go well, then they might select you to go to the Pan Am Games, Para-Pan Games, or eventually the Olympics or Paralympics. So you can also go through the Olympic or Paralympic organizing committee for a specific game. So the Salt Lake Organizing Committee, they have their own staff, they have their own physicians. So the Olympic Committee will bring, like the USOPC or and any of the other countries that are coming to an Olympic Games, they'll bring their own physician contingency. But the organizing committee has sort of a baseline infrastructure. So the Salt Lake Organizing Committee worked really closely with 2 of the hospital systems in Salt Lake, one being University of Utah and the other being LDS Hospital. And essentially they've staffed for the venues and for the polyclinic, which is in the athlete village, along with all of the other physicians that came with the various national Olympic and Paralympic committees. So you would want to apply for that position, and things that really help you get a position with the organizing committee. One is just having a strong CV. So good training, strong letters of recommendation, lots of experience, but language skills. So I know a physician that's here in the United States right now who was selected to work with the organizing committee in Tokyo because they speak English well and Japanese. And so that was going to help that organizing committee because the person was bilingual, and the two primary languages of the Olympics are French and English. And so they wanted to have strong English speakers that also spoke Japanese as part of their organizing committee. A lot of times, if you live or practice in the location of the Olympic or Paralympic Games, that makes a big difference. So we have the Olympics coming up in LA in 2028, Summer Olympics there. And I've had several physicians from the LA area reach out to me and say, hey, I'd be interested in helping out if you need help when it comes. And these physicians happen to be extremely experienced and people I know well. So I'm going to get them involved in the Olympic and Paralympic community now, so that when we're coming to the games at that time, they're going to probably work with the organizing committee, but we're going to be able to interface really, really well with them. And then, of course, having good connections within the organizing committee makes a big difference. And so networking is really important. Covering test events is really important, because a lot of times once people know you and they see your skill sets, they like being around you, because the Olympic and Paralympic Games, you're working long, long hours and you are with the same people for a long time. And if you don't get along with people, it's miserable. So they want to hire people and bring people in that they like. So with the International Olympic and Paralympic Committee, that one, you have to go through and work your way up in the national governing bodies or international federations before they would even consider you at the International Olympic or Paralympic Committee level. You're usually nominated by your NGB or your National Olympic Committee or your international federation to work with the IOC or IPC. And again, this would be more of an administrative role. So whether you're doing it through the IOC, IPC, or an international federation, those are not as much hands-on. They're much more administrative. So those are the different pathways. So those 5 different pathways, and they are totally different. Your sort of base training and experience to get into those pathways are all similar, but then those pathways take very different courses. So now I'll tell you a little bit about my story. So, growing up in Colorado, I was a skier and biker and raced at a pretty high level, and eventually raced professionally in bike racing. So this is me at the national championships a long time ago. And that's what I thought I was going to do. Like when I was in college, I was, number one, I would go into class the first day and pick up the syllabus, and then I would never attend anything except for the tests, because I was traveling and I was racing and I was training and I was just studying at night and stuff. And I was studying business because I figured I'll race until I end my career, and then I'll just transition into some sort of business role within the bike industry. But then one day I was coming home from a test late at night, and I was riding my bike across if any of you know Boulder, there's the Boulder Public Library downtown that goes right by Boulder Creek. And so there's a bike path bridge that goes over that creek. And so I was riding my bike home. I went over that bridge, and there was a kid that looked like he was college age laying in the middle of the bridge. And I was going fast trying to get home. And so I kind of ripped by him, and he was laying there. And so I slammed on my brakes and flipped it around and went back just to see if he was okay. And I came back, and he was breathing weird, and his eyes were open, and it was late, and there were lights that were off in the distance, but I couldn't see him very well. And so I was looking closer and closer, and looked like he'd passed out and thrown up, and there's all this fluid around him. As I looked closer, that fluid was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was really dark. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think that's blood. So this is pre-cell phone. So I jump on my bike right over to the library, call 911, and then go back and wait with this guy for the ambulance to come, and he stops breathing and ends up passing away. And when the paramedics got there, they didn't even try to revive him. And I was really shaken up by that. And I thought, that is crazy. I had no idea what to do. And I'm in a really dangerous sport. Like, I'm in the back country all the time with people going super fast down ridiculous stuff that people can get super injured, and I wouldn't know what to do. So I decided I'm going to take an EMT course so that I at least have some basic emergency medical skills that I can help if I ever come across a situation like this again. So I took an EMT course. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I love it. And changed my major from business into a pre-med type of major. Finished up undergraduate and went to medical school. Tried to continue racing, but I kept my professional license. But the first year after school, I went to my first race and just got destroyed. And so that was the end of my serious bike racing career. But went to University of New England in Maine, and then did my residency at University of Utah, and then went out to Mayo Clinic for a sports medicine fellowship. So then I headed back. During my residency, I volunteered for a bunch of different sports coverage because I knew that I wanted to go into sports medicine. And I also knew at the time, this was before they had ACGME accredited sports medicine fellowships for PM&R. So there were only a few fellowships and they were super, super competitive. So I was like, what can I do to set myself up for success and make myself a stronger applicant for a fellowship? So I did a lot of sports coverage, including a lot of Golden Gloves boxing specifically, and high school football. Then I matched at Mayo, which actually wasn't really a match. It was more of a phone call. And in fellowship, it gave me tremendous experience. I mean, I just covered so much while I was in fellowship. So hockey, football, wrestling, basketball, volleyball, all of the typical sort of high school sports, but also a lot of collegiate sports at that time. And they gave me opportunities to be medical director with somebody serving as a mentor, but for multiple mass participation events. And so I gained a lot of experience during my fellowship serving in those roles, which really set me up for what I did right afterwards. So after I finished my fellowship, I went back to University of Utah and was on their faculty for less than a year. And then Utah State University had called Mayo and said, hey, do you have any old fellows that might be interested in being our head team physician? They're like, well, geez, we just had a graduate from this last year who lives in Salt Lake. You should totally call him up. And so they called me up and hired me. So in my first year, I went from working in a sports medicine clinic to being the head team physician for a D1 school with 18 sports, including football, which was a big jump, but it gave me a huge amount of experience. I mean, I was totally thrown into the fire and had to learn while I was there on the job for sure. But then the other thing that happened is that the Olympics and Paralympics came to Salt Lake. And so I was the medical director for a bunch of the different test events leading up to the Olympics, and then applied for and received the athlete clinic medical director job for the 2002 Winter Olympics. So I was, 2 years out of fellowship, and there I was, medical director for the Winter Olympic Games one of the athlete medical clinics. And some of it was right place, right time. I happened to also ski race against a bunch of the people who were on the national team at the time. And so they knew who I was. So when I applied, they saw, recognized my name, saw my training and so on. And so that made a big difference. And then during the Paralympic Winter Games that year, I was the venue medical director. So I ran the whole, not just the athletes clinic, but spectator medical, all of the workers, the volunteer medical. So took care of everybody from a workers' comp standpoint and all of the athletes. And that was just huge. And my first introduction to really working with the Olympics and Paralympics. But during that time frame, I met the current head team physician for the U.S. ski team. And his name was Jay Butcher. He's from up in Duluth, Minnesota. Super nice guy, family medicine, well before they had sports medicine as a specialty. But he'd been working with the ski team for a long time. And so I asked him how I could get involved, and he set me up in the physician pool. So the next year, they had me go and work at the national championships in Bethel, Maine. And if none of you have been to Bethel, Maine, it is a small town in rural Maine. And it was quite an interesting experience, but the athletes actually did pretty well, but one of the things you'll find is that it's not always the athletes that have the problems. So I was at the starting line, and somebody runs down and is like, is there anybody medical here? Anybody medical? And, I said yes. And they took me up into about 100 yards up from the start, and somebody hiking up from the starts to watch it. It was one of the parents of one of the athletes had a heart attack. And so they were in cardiac arrest. And so we started CPR, and, ski patrol showed up, and we put in an IV, and we put on a AED and started doing, ACLS with epinephrine and different drugs. And he actually got a rhythm, but did not wake up. And then he was transported to the hospital. He ended up passing away. But I mean, you just have to be prepared for any of those different situations, whether it's your athlete having a serious injury or one of the spectators. So then the next year, they asked me to go to the World Championships for under 23, which happens to be in Utah that year. And that was great. And since I did well at the 2 under 23 World Championships, one in Bormio, Italy, and then the other one in Utah, they asked me to start traveling with the team and covering World Cups. And so you'll see here, then I started just kind of bouncing back and forth between World Championships and World Cups. And the order of events, it goes Olympics or Paralympics, and then the next year is a World Championship, and then the next year is just your standard World Cups, and then it's World Championship, and then an Olympics. So Olympics are every 4 years, World Championships are every 2 years, and World Cups are every year. And so I was kind of bouncing back and forth between a World Cup on a non-World Championship year and a World Championship on that respective year. And so, you also notice, so Ramsau, Austria, Canmore, Canada, Liberec, Czech Republic, Chanute, France, you get to go to some pretty dang cool places and meet some really interesting people. And, the World Cup circuit, as you're traveling with people, it's the same people every weekend. So you meet the athletes, you meet the medical teams from the other countries. A lot of times we have more resources than a lot of other countries. And so they come to you for help, and then vice versa. If you're in Austria, you need that Austrian doctor to help you because, one of your athletes is sick or injured. It makes a huge difference, but it's really interesting and fun. So then the next one was World Championships in Norway. And then after 2011, because of my experience and dedication with the team, and they liked me and my skill set was reasonable, they asked me to be the head team physician for Nordic Combined. And that's a combination of jumping and skiing, cross-country skiing. So essentially when you jump, they'll convert the distance that you jumped, the score that you got on your jump, into a time, and then they'll start the ski race in a staggered approach based on your ski jump time. And so the first person who crosses the finish line at the end is actually the winner of the event. And so it is really exciting, and it combines two sports that are actually quite popular over in Europe. As the head team physician for the Nordic Combined team, I was also appointed to the USSA's medical committee, which is formed by the head team physicians of each of the different disciplines. Then I went to the test event to Sochi in the following year because I was the head team physician for Nordic Combined. I went to the Olympics with an NGB. So at that point, I'd gone through an organizing committee, the Salt Lake Organizing Committee, to the Olympics in 2002. This was my first experience going as an NGB team physician, which is a lot different than working for the organizing committee. These are a couple of the other physicians. This is Terry Orr, and he was the head alpine physician for the US ski team, the men's alpine physician. And so I was actually at the time working out in Lake Tahoe and living in Lake Tahoe, and was part of Terry Orr's group. This was at the women's gold medal hockey game, which unfortunately Canada won. We were winning, we were a goal ahead with a minute left. Canada tied it up, it went into overtime, and Canada scored the winning goal. It was pretty awful, but the event up to that point had been pretty awesome. So then in 2016, I went back and worked at a World Cup. 2017 was World Championship. And then I went to the Olympic Winter Games in Pyeongchang, again, as the head team physician. And one of the coolest things with that is our women. The women's relay team won the first medal a female athlete from cross-country discipline had ever won a medal, and it was a gold medal. So if you're going to go big, you may as well get the gold, right? And so it was Keegan Randall, who was shortly thereafter diagnosed with breast cancer and thankfully has survived and been treated successfully, and Jessie Diggins, who is from Minnesota. And at the time that this happened, I was back at Mayo Clinic, and so Jessie was a local hero for sure. So, then 2020 rolls around, and this chief medical officer position came through the USOPC. And I was very happy at Mayo, loved my position, and really liked my job with the ski team. And so when the advertisement for this job went out, I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool job for somebody else. Click, delete, and wasn't really going to look at it. And then they kept this headhunting firm kept contacting me and saying, hey, you've got a lot of experience in this area. Maybe this would be good for you. And my family, of course, is still here in Colorado, and the Olympic movement and Paralympic movement is amazing. And there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done in this area. And I like work. So, and next, I started talking to them, and one thing led to another, and I moved here, and there was a pandemic, and they canceled the Olympics. So what I've learned, you really want to be part of the team. If you are there and you go to dinner with the team and you sit at a separate table, or you sit and you're quiet and you're not really getting to know people and stuff, they're not going to really have any interest in having you come back out on another event. It's really important to try to integrate with the team. I'm not a big social media person, but you can learn a ton about the athletes by looking at their social media posts, and then that strikes up small talk and conversation at the table. And getting to know who they are, what their goals are, learn about their family, and so on. It makes a huge difference, because then when you leave, they're all like, oh, I'm so sorry to see you go, and thanks so much for all your help, and you get invited back. And that makes a huge difference. So be part of the team. Be flexible. Things do not go as you expect them to go. You show up at, some airport in Asia somewhere, and the team's not there, and you're supposed to be meeting them, and you don't know where the hotel is. And I mean, you just have to be flexible. Things happen, flights get delayed, people get hurt. I can tell you other stories just about different injuries and having to deal with medical systems in different countries, and the team having to move on to the next location while you're managing an injury in one space. You have to be flexible. If you're not a good traveler and you're not able to kind of roll with the punches, it's going to be tough. Nothing's ever comfortable. The rooms are always too cold or too hot. Your roommate wants to watch TV all night. You have to be flexible. Be available. If you go and you're supposed to be working and you're out, shopping or skiing or biking or whatever, and you're not available when the team needs you, they are never going to invite you out. Always lend a helping hand. So when you're in the airport, grab people's bags, haul them out for them. When you're going to the training center, carry skis, be there ready with the water bottle. You are there, and you are another set of hands to help. You're not just the physician. You're one of the team, and you will do whatever they need you to do. Be a good physician. I have to say, there are a lot of bad physicians who get into really good positions because they are nice, but they're not good at what they do. Be ethical. Don't do stuff that you don't think is appropriate just because an athlete wants you to. Be communicative. Realize that in a lot of the areas that you're going to be traveling in, you're not going to have your normal supplies. And so you're going to have to be creative, whether that's creative figuring out solutions to your problem in a hotel room, or whether that is being creative in terms of finding local resources to help you solve the problem that you're trying to solve. So be MacGyver. And, one of the last things I say, sports medicine is a labor of love. If you want to make money, pain, spine, there are things where you can make a load of money. Sports medicine tends to pay just average, but almost everything that you do is volunteer. And it's nights and it's weekends, it's time away from your family. But man, it is the most amazing thing, in my opinion, that you can ever do, is to be a part of, that group, making a huge difference and an impact on people's lives, particularly with your Paralympic athletes who often don't have great medical care even at home. It's shocking to me that you can have a gold medalist Paralympian who has all these medical problems and doesn't have a physician. If you're their team physician, it just makes a huge, huge difference in people's lives. And that's what medicine is about, is having impact. So that is my presentation, and I am happy to field any of your questions.
Hey, John. Sorry for the spooky lighting. My daughter wanted to see you. How has it been being a physiatrist within kind of these big inner workings?
Well, so with it's kind of interesting. So the chief medical officer for the International Paralympic Committee is Sherry Blatt from Mass General, so Harvard. And I'm the chief medical officer for the USOPC. So pretty, big positions within the Olympic and Paralympic community, both nationally and internationally. But there's not a lot of physiatrists who are that have roles within these two areas. And so frequently, I feel like I'm a DO, and a lot of people, my grandmother still doesn't know that I can write prescriptions. And I'm a physiatrist, and both of those people just don't know as much what those are and what you can do. And so, but as they learn more about you, man, physiatrists are just really, really multi-purpose healthcare providers, and they tend to have great personalities. Again, just people who you want to be around. They care a great deal about their patient population. So I think the skill set is great. You have to do a lot of education because people are not as familiar with it, even within medicine. But I think that we're really well positioned to be leaders in the field. There are pros and cons though with every single different pathway you go through. I mean, when we're doing all of the COVID cardiac workups and pulmonary workups, I'm pretty comfortable with it, but I'm not as good as our internal medicine docs who are doing that on a daily basis in their clinics. But I do a lot of stuff that they don't. And so in my opinion, what you want is a really good team leader, which PM&R docs are absolutely great team leaders. And you need to get the right people with the right skills as a team around your athletes. So, we're perfectly positioned for that.
I have a question, I guess real quick. Is that like for, I guess, residents now, like myself that are interested in sports medicine, I found myself in the position that a lot of the events that I was planning to cover and like races and bigger events have been canceled in the era of COVID. And what recommendations do you have so that we don't necessarily get behind on that experience, but still kind of have that, those important things?
Yeah, I mean, that is a great question. I mean, COVID has just impacted everything, medical education, all of your different opportunities as far as event coverage. I would say that, thankfully the residency is 3 years, and hopefully this is going to impact a small segment of your residency. But it will. There's just not as many events that are happening right now. A lot of things are being canceled. That being said, events that are being held need a lot of medical help, meaning they need people to help write protocols, do screening, be willing to evaluate athletes and or staff, volunteers who are exhibiting signs and symptoms of COVID-19. So I think that there is a lot that can be done, and there's a definite need for medical personnel. But that being said, there just aren't as many opportunities. So it's hard, but I am of the opinion that over the next year, we're either going to, hopefully have a much more effective treatment or a vaccine, or the other thing is just figuring out and being part of the solution of how do we live with this? How do we have sports events in, the time of COVID? And there are a lot of success stories out there. So, but I know it's limiting, and I'm really, I feel for you. I feel for you.
I appreciate it.
Malia, we'll see you here. We'll see you on the sidelines at Smoky Hill High School tomorrow night.
Yes, tomorrow.
Hey, this is Balaji, a resident also in PM&R, and following up on Malia's question there, is there anything we can do? It's kind of I think I guess you basically mentioned it, but anything else we can try to do to kind of set ourselves up for these, future events or anything kind of you can think of that, sets us up well for to be in the sports kind of world and coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's positive in Colorado, at least, that some other states don't have the opportunity is high school sports. There's still a fair amount of high school sports going on, and so you can definitely do some high school sports coverage. I think that you can, one of the things that if you don't have the opportunity to do a specific event that you wanted to cover is do some simulations. So working as like if you guys have a sports medicine special interest group type of thing within your residency, and if they cancel a marathon or they're not going to have a triathlon, is talking about, well, how would we organize it? Let's write up a simulation of what supplies we would want, where we would want to have people stationed at the event, and let's hold a simulation where we pretend that we're doing the event and we have various scenarios that people are experiencing, altered level of consciousness. So, what's your differential for that? How do you work that person up in the field? And then what treatments can you do acutely that can take care of a life-threatening condition? You're going to be looking at hyponatremia and hypoglycemia and, heat illness and so on and so forth. So those are things that you can write up and you can put on your CV, because I think that right now, particularly if you're looking at a fellowship, you can absolutely do stuff where you're demonstrating that we had a journal club because for sports medicine, we set up a simulation of an event that was canceled. We went through and did this, and show that you have leadership skills, that you're motivated, and and you can send in what your plan was. Here's our medical plan that we wrote for this particular event. So I'd say the best thing, of course, is trying to cover events. But if you can't find events to cover, then you have to figure out other ways to do it. And that would be one thing you could do. The other thing is taking the time to do research, publications, case reports and stuff. Because I'll tell you, as a fellowship director, because before I came here, I was the fellowship director for Mayo Clinic's Sports Medicine Fellowship in Minneapolis. I looked a lot at what presentations did you do at national conferences? What research did you do? Is it published or was it submitted? Were you involved in any committees on national organizations? Did you guys arrange a special interest group for sports medicine? What did that special interest group do? So all of those things would probably take a larger role in my evaluation of residents that were applying to sports medicine fellowship if they just didn't have as many sports event coverage opportunities, because globally, everybody's going to struggle right now.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Any other questions at all?
Thanks. That was a great presentation. Just a quick question, more out of curiosity than immediate practicality, is when something goes wrong, say not catastrophically wrong, but the shoulder injury that you showed the video of, there's all these different physicians with all these different affiliations. Can you kind of walk through how the medical care plays out acutely and then in the days and weeks that follow?
Yeah, so so with that particular injury, so the first thing, of course, you're standing at the bottom of it's called the outrun, where they come down and land after the jump. And so there is a medical team for the venue. Every World Cup event, just like any other event, has to have an emergency action plan. They have to have on-site medical crews and stuff. And so their on-site medical crew ran out, and I was in the medical zone, so I ran out as well. we did an initial assessment. That happens to be in France, and so the medical crew didn't speak very good English, so they had a hard time asking any questions. So it was actually a really good thing that I was there for that anyway. So I was talking to the athlete. I knew him well. He was behaving in an odd way, and so I knew that his head had gotten bonked for sure. He was complaining of his shoulder pain. We just to get him back into anatomic position, he reduced automatically by bringing his arm back down into a normal anatomic position. Then we splinted him, packaged him up in a little portable gurney thing that they had driven out there, and then put him in the ambulance. And I rode with him in the ambulance and left an athletic trainer there to cover the rest of the event. And I went to the hospital with him. So we got x-rays there, and he had the fracture, but he had been reduced, so he was no longer dislocated. We didn't get any advanced imaging at that time to look at his rotator cuff or anything like that, but the immediate concern was, is the fracture stable? Can he travel back home? Pain control, and then of course DVT prophylaxis and stuff, because he's just kind of immobile and has trauma. So he stayed with the team and us for about a week. We wanted him to be recovered from his concussion enough that he was competent to be able to get himself home, in a plane and navigate through the different airports and stuff. But we coordinated through, there's a sort of travel rescue, it's called Global Rescue service that we work with the US ski team. And so they helped coordinate some of the medical care as we were getting him home. And then he returned home to Steamboat. And one of the physicians in the pool was there. And so when he got home, he had surgery on that fracture dislocation. So they just repaired the fracture fragment. So it was on the anterior aspect of the glenoid, and it was a large enough chunk that it was going to cause a problem. So it wasn't just a standard Bankart lesion; it was a larger fracture. And then it was rehabilitation from there. And so I kept in constant contact with him, the orthopedic surgeon that was back home, and his physical therapist. As a team, we had to make a decision about whether he would be ready for the Olympics. And he was not going to be ready for the beginning because it was only going to be 4 weeks out. And the soonest that he would be allowed to jump is at 6 weeks out. So that would be the last week of the Olympic Games. So it was a debate. Do we leave him home, or do we know that after 6 weeks, he might be fit from an aerobic standpoint, but he won't have jumped much, and he certainly won't have skied because he won't be using his arms. But there was a huge jump between him and the next person that we would bring up in his place. So we worked hard to maintain his aerobic fitness initially on a stationary bike, non-weight bearing. It was kind of a recumbent bike type of thing. And then eventually he could start doing some running, but no weight bearing through his arm. And then finally he started doing some skiing where he was out with one pole and just skiing with his legs. And then while we were over in Sochi, we were getting serial CT scans actually, and looking at the healing progress of that, where he had the fracture dislocation and the surgery. And it was healing, it was stable. So he did 2 days of practice jumps and then did his competition. And he actually, he didn't have a great race. He was, of the 3 athletes that we had there, he was 3rd. But he was still, in the top 12 of the Olympic Games. So not too bad.
Sorry, I lost my unmute button. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, no problem. And there are a lot of other cases that it's interesting trying to work in different medical systems. Global Rescue is a huge help. They're out of Johns Hopkins, and they have interpreters and then all of their subspecialists, and they will interface with the hospital where your athlete is located. And they'll also, if needed, either arrange for fixed wing or rotary wing transportation of athletes to different areas. Sometimes they use military transports to get the athletes back home. But that's a huge resource that's really beneficial.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
And I haven't been able to visit yet, but I've been hearing that the Olympic and Paralympic Museum is pretty awesome. So hoping to make it down.
Yeah, it's interesting because all of the staff who work directly with the athletes, we have signed an agreement where we don't do any public stuff. So we're not going to the museum or restaurants or any movies or anything like that. You essentially are sheltering in place. But I've heard it is unbelievable. So you definitely have to go visit it.
Very cool. All right.